Zealand Sub-Antarctic Islands. This talk is not entirely accurate because it also includes an Australian sub-Antarctic island. This area here that I'm circling, you can see my marker there, can you? That shows up on the screen. That's Macquarie Island, which is an Australian island, and also it includes the Chatham Islands, which aren't exactly sub-Antarctic, but that was the route that we took. It sounds terribly polar, sub-Antarctic, but in fact the latitudes aren't really that far south at all. The furthest, the most southerly is about 55 degrees south at Macquarie, and up on the Bounty Islands it's about 44. So in fact, you know, we're London is at what, 53 north, and we're closer to the North Pole here than any of these islands are to the South Pole. It's just that they've got a very polar sort of climate. Here they are again, and you can see I said that they're remote because they genuinely are. They are miles and miles away, 5,000 miles from any other islands on the same latitude. This is the Antarctic Peninsula is the place where most people go, and you know, there's nothing along here or along there to meet any other land at all. So they are remote in that respect, and also there's only a couple of hundred people a year manage to get down there compared to the sort of 10s, 20, 30,000 people that visit Antarctica to South Georgia, the Falklands and the South Shetland Islands. But climatically, they are really very different to us. They're prone to very long periods of strong winds, rain, cold and cloud, far worse than anything up here. Macquarie averages 314 days a year of precipitation, mists and drizzle, and some snow. They're extremely windy. It's in this formidable sounding roaring 50s and furious 50s, the latitudes. And the reason that they're so windy, of course, is if you think of Antarctica, it's a continent surrounded by an ocean, and the North Pole, the Arctic, is an ocean surrounded by land masses. So there's nothing to stop these winds that circulate around the globe, racing right the way round and round and round with nothing to stop them. Hence you get these pretty ferocious seas. That's it. Here we go. This is a geology map. I'm not going to say too much of the geology because we've got an eminent geologist watching us. But this shows you these are some of the islands that we're talking about. These little red pimples south of the South Island of New Zealand, and they're all part of the same sort of submarine plateau. I think it's part of what was a sort of mini continent of Zealandia, part of bits of Gondwana land that split off many thousands, millions of years ago. Some are granitic, I believe, metamorphic parts of the seabed rock, other parts ancient Gondwana land, and some of them are quite recent. I think Macquarie Island is only about 700,000 years old, and I believe is unique in that it's apparently the only island on the planet formed by the collision of two oceanic plates, pushing the actual Earth's crust up into above water level. But I'm sure David Webster could verify that for me. So they're among the world's wildest and remotest places. Even with the vastness of the forbidding Antarctic Ocean, they're remote from any other island group. And depending on their geology, they're a sort of mix of rugged and natural habitats, some still near pristine, others badly affected by attempted colonization, introduced flora and fauna, and overexploitation. So this is what a lot of them look like. some of the bigger islands have a little bit more going for them. This is Auckland, the Auckland Islands group. They're bigger. They've got a few plants, and they're not just absolutely bare rock, but they're pretty way up there in terms of their bleakness. So this is a little bit about the history of how they were first discovered. The first island to be discovered here, well, let's first say that there are a few scant relics indicating that some groups of Maori discovered them 600 years ago, but it seems that the remoteness and climate didn't allow them to thrive, and none survived. So these islands were basically rediscovered by European sailors. Bounty Island was the first one in 1788. Captain Cook, on his way from South America, taking breadfruit to plant in Tahiti, and got blown off course. And of course, they're named after the ill-fated ship that he was captain of at the time. Then the next one, 3 years later, the Snares Islands, called the Snares because of the potential for sort of shipwrecks and how dangerous they were. And then the Antipodes, a bit later on, 1800, called the Antipodes because at this point, if you put a line between there right through the centre of the planet, you'd come out in London. So, you know, British sailors were calling it the Antipodes Islands, the absolute opposite end of the planet. Then Auckland Islands in 1806, Macquarie 1810, Campbell Island, and then of course the Chatham Islands up here are much more mellow, better climate, and those were first colonised by the Moriori, a group of Maoris back in the 1500s. Yeah, so these were all discovered more or less by accident, wandering whaling vessels. The Auckland Islands were called the Aucklands after Lord Auckland, Macquarie after the Governor General of New South Wales, Chatham Islands after the ship that they were on, the HMS Chatham. So they've only been known to us for really just 200 or 300 years. And this gives you a quick idea of the size of them. Some of them are absolutely tiny. Auckland Island here, 62,000 hectares, which is almost the same size, I believe, as Isla. Some of the others, the Bounty Islands, are barely even a decent sized farm, 135 hectares. So some of them are tiny little specks of rock, and others substantially larger. And the Chathams, quite a bit bigger still. So soon after discovery, whalers, sealers set up camps, some seasonal, some attempting to be permanent. They rapidly began decimating the huge populations of elephant seals, fur seals and sea lions for their oil and fur. Millions of animals were killed over 100 years or more of slaughter. That's pretty awful, but the conditions for the men working there were absolutely foul as well. They were often marooned or shipwrecked. I think the longest lot was shipwrecked for about 8 years. So pretty tough stuff. At the same time, the islands were used as a land base for whaling, and when seals were running low, penguins for oil and feathers were slaughtered in equally huge numbers. With all these riches available, it was important to claim sovereignty by establishing permanent settlements, and Britain, via their colonies in Australia and New Zealand, got there first. These pictures illustrate the top left one here. These are the remains of these boiling pots that they used to march unsuspecting penguins into a great vat and boil them down for their oil. Here's some of the men taking a break, surrounded by their naive penguins that they're about to chop up. The bottom left here, they set up a whole load of these little huts just in case people got shipwrecked there. They would have them provisioned, and so that people could have some shelter should they get stuck there. And this bottom right picture is the remains of a frame of a boat that some people that were shipwrecked made to try and escape the islands. I've absolutely no idea whether they made it, but it looks pretty flimsy to be going around in those sorts of seas. So there were people settling there. especially on the more hospitable island groups of Campbell and Auckland, campaigns inviting colonists to go and farm on these newly found islands promised far better conditions than the harsh reality. Even the tiny little islands that are just bare rocks, Bounty Islands and the Antipodes, for instance, were mentioned in Britain as, you know, new places to colonize. They obviously had no idea, but were just desperate to get people out there to say that they were British. But they did try on some of the better islands, and this is Enderby. Enderby had a whaling and sealing company, and he set up a colony which failed very rapidly. So although the colony attempts failed, they of course left behind all their surviving alien species that they'd taken to the islands. You can see here cows, goats, rats, pigs, cats, sheep, rabbits, the lot. They were all left there. Some of them, they were leaving thousands and thousands of livestock behind, where they realised that these islands just couldn't really sensibly support people farming in any way whatsoever. They were just too remote. And so we get this horrible business that we get in New Zealand, all over New Zealand, but here as well, of these wonderful animals, birds in particular. There were no land mammals there, becoming extinct very rapidly as soon as man got there and started putting his pests on there. They were destroying the habitat, the vegetation, and predating. You'll notice there's a very sort of strong bias towards rails, which are notoriously easy prey, and they tend not to fly. And here's some more. There were, I think, 14 species were lost from these islands, totally extirpated, lost forever. And that's in addition to about 40 more on the mainland New Zealand, of course. So they were lost due to human hunting, habitat loss, and predation by introduced mammals. But by the mid-1900s, with these islands once again uninhabited and an awareness of their ecological importance, thoughts turned to their restoration and protection. These extracts from conservationist notebooks on Macquarie Island really say it all. It's interesting, they're talking about wekas. A lot of these native rails became extinct, and then they go and introduce a rail from New Zealand there, which becomes quite predatory. They start digging up petrels' nests and eating their eggs. And it says here the number of rodents at this hut has increased dramatically, talking about huge numbers of cats. And then later on, 30 years later, when they're actually starting this program back in 2010, it says here, you know, landslips not uncommon, steep slopes, enormous numbers of rabbits have added to the instability. Whole hillside moving, it was rabbits in their hundreds. And then from the same person, obviously, saying that they're going to get cracking here, and what they're going to use, baiting program, specially trained dogs that will only take the targeted introduced animals. And this is just a quick reminder of the sorts of things that they were doing. Huge, I mean, it's massively expensive, labor intensive, long term, but they're very, very successful at it. This is a picture of a helicopter dropping poison bait, or you can put poison bait down here on the left into little traps. And then once you've hopefully got rid of most of the animals you didn't want, you can get specially trained dogs to sniff the rest of them out and catch them, or go and shoot them. But it is a very, very labor intensive job. And so nowadays they're all World Heritage Sites, very carefully protected. New Zealanders and Australians are masters of eradication of pests from islands, and continue to rid many islands all around the world. Some of you will know from living on Isla that if you've ever been over to Oronsay, the RSPB reserve, they did a similar sort of thing on a much smaller scale a few years ago, got rid of rats on some little offshore islets, and instantly you start getting breeding success from terns and gulls and things like that. So that's a little bit of the history, and now we're getting onto my actual visit there. So my visit's a bit more positive than the grizzly history, because they're now being very, very well looked after. So that's the route that we took. Started in Invercargill and went in a sort of anti-clockwise trip right the way round and back to Dunedin. The main reason for going, other than being persuaded by Mike Peacock to go there, was that they are very remote, and I do love islands. Say only a couple of hundred visitors a year, so it's a pretty privileged place to get to. Lots of endemic birds, so that if you're a keen birder, there are species there that you're not going to see anywhere else in the world. And it really is, the seabird mecca, the seabird capital of the world, really. About 80 species of seabirds alone in New Zealand, and many of them found in abundance down here. So that's the ship that we were on. It's definitely no frills. It's an ex-Russian ship, still with Russian crew. And despite several long sea voyages that I've done before in Antarctica and various other places, I was quite worried about seasickness, as it's a very small ship, and as I say, it has this reputation, the roaring 40s and furious 50s. And in fact, I met the rep, this is Heritage Expeditions, and I met their rep at the British Bird Fair before I went. And he said that, I got his words almost verbatim. He said, there will almost certainly be a few days when you will feel awful and you'll not be allowed onto the deck as it's too rough and dangerous. Not the best sales pitch for a very expensive holiday, but we went anyway. And in fact, we're really quite lucky, and we didn't have horrendously rough seas. It wasn't too bad at all. But these little orange lifeboats that you can see here, you go through all the usual stuff at the beginning. You sit in these and you're told what will happen if everything goes wrong, which you hope it doesn't. And then you set off south and you get to Snares. This is the only island group that we visited that has absolutely never had any introduced animals on, so they don't allow anyone on it at all. It's completely pristine. So all you can do is to sail round it, zodiac round it, and look for some of the special birds. Now this is a bit of video. I've got a few video clips here. This is just a So, I mean, that's a little bit worse than Calmac on a bad day, I suppose, but that's about as bad as it got. So we start seeing some of the special birds there. The Snares penguin is only on the Snares Islands. 60,000 birds there, and completely unique to these islands that no one's allowed on. So that was a good start. And as I said there, this is just a map of all the radio satellite tracking that they've done on sooty shearwaters. There's 5 million pairs of sooty shearwaters nesting on these islands. And here we are down here below New Zealand, and this is the whole of the Pacific that they're ranging around when they're away from the island. And so you start seeing seabirds big time. I hasten to add that virtually none of these, in fact, almost entirely, none of these are my pictures. It's a wonderful business on these cruises. There's loads of king birdwoods, people with much better cameras than mine, and they're all very happy to share. So these are all filched from, and gratefully, from other people. So after that, we set off to sea towards the Auckland Islands. Each island group took anything between a day and 2 to 3 days of sailing between. So you get to an island, hopefully a bit of shelter, maybe get to land on some of them, not all of them, and then you'd be 2 or 3 days on this little boat looking for seabirds as you go. But as you can see, there's some pretty marvellous seabirds to be found there. this is on the level, or not on the level, if you see what I mean. This is just a little bit of pitch and roll on the ship. You can see it's not exactly a flashy vessel, but it was okay. And then yeah, that's when it got really bad. You couldn't get any espresso in the canteen. But as with most of these ships, they allow you up on the bridge, and it's a great place to go when it's raining or windy or cold. You can stand up on the bridge and get a really good panoramic view to see what's about. So we eventually get to the Auckland Islands and down this steep gangway into the Zodiacs, these massive great inflatables with a big powerful engine and a sort of a rigid floor at the bottom, and a dozen people in each, and off you go exploring. So the Auckland Islands, you remember, is about the same size as Isla. The two Black Arrows are the two places that we landed in. And say one of the larger groups with better soils and more luxuriant vegetation, the settlement that I showed you a picture of was there, about 200 people, and they lasted for 4 years before they all gave up and left. So it was and at the time, this is the interesting thing, obviously the British government was so keen and didn't know, because they'd know most of these people making these rules and regulations and laws hadn't been there. There was a governor on Auckland Islands who was of the same status as called a lieutenant governor, and he was the same status as the lieutenant governor of other colonies such as Canada, Australia and New Zealand, but he didn't have much to govern. But after that it was just sporadically used by sealers, whalers and people from various shipwrecks. So once we're ashore, they're quite careful not to allow you to, even though there's only a couple of hundred people a year, they've got these boardwalks made so that you don't trample the vegetation. It's quite sort of fragile and on peat. And these bigger islands do, I mean, I'm not a great botanist, but a lot of people are raving about the plant life. It's almost everything there is unique. And it's this stuff called mega herbs. They grow in a very special way to combat this fiercely windy, salt-laden atmosphere. That's one of the lovely big mega herbs that you can see there. So it's 84% of the flora endemic. And it all looks lovely on a day like this. This is a little sort of research station that wasn't manned when we were there. We came into this bay and landed and had a walk around. It was a lovely sunny day, but a winter's day when it's blowing a gale, it would not be a particularly nice place. But it doesn't look that dissimilar from a lot of the Scottish islands that I'm sure a lot of us are very familiar with. But it's the birds that we're after. There's a number of quite regular land birds that occur in mainland New Zealand as well. There's a tomtit at the top here and a red-fronted parakeet. But what I found very strange is that on the mainland of New Zealand, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of thriving introduced birds from Europe. They were introduced, they were brought down by ship in the 1800s, and now they've made their own way. They haven't been introduced to these islands. They've just started sort of moving up and down New Zealand and got blown out to the islands here. So you've got redpolls, starlings, dunnocks, chaffinches, greenfinches on these islands as well, but at least they've made it there under their own steam. Slightly more interesting, there's giant petrels nesting here. There's a chick there. There's one of the plovers, double-banded plover, and this thing, a thing called a New Zealand falcon, which I hadn't realised before. I'd seen them before, but seeing them flying around, you realise that they've got very short wings because they're feeding mostly on small birds in the woodland, this sort of stunted trees that you can see up here. So they're behaving more like a sparrowhawk with short wings to manoeuvre through woodland rather than these long pointed wings for fast flight that you associate falcons with. But some of the more special birds were these things. You get a few yellow-eyed penguins in mainland New Zealand, but they're on a very sticky wicket there. There's not many left. And we start seeing the first of many, many different species of shags, cormorants, every one of these island groups has what is now deemed to be a separate species of shag. And they honestly, they all look the same. They're all black and white with nice bits of colour around the eyes, but every one is apparently different. So this is the Auckland Island shag. We saw over 10 species whilst on our trip. Much more interesting were these two little things. This is an Auckland Islands teal and the Auckland Islands snipe. The teal is flightless. You can see there it's flapping its wings and it wouldn't get very far with those. And this snipe too behaves more like a rail. I never saw one fly the whole time I was there. They just creep about in the undergrowth. Very, very interesting bit of evolution there. Very vulnerable, both of them, to introduce rats and what have you. So they're in incredibly small numbers. And then at the south end of the Aucklands, we came here to Carnley Harbour to climb up to a white-capped albatross colony. That's myself and a friend of mine, and just having finished the climb. You can see in the distance there between our two heads, there's the ship, long way off. So we zodiaced all the way up here and then hiked up several hundred feet to get to this albatross colony. And there you can see some of them on the cliffs flying by. Again, you know, the habitat looks not dissimilar to a lot of Isla, really. There's a close-up of the white-capped albatross. Typically, a lot of these mollymawk albatrosses build these big pedestal mud nests, and they add to them year after year. And then in the afternoon, you go cruising in the Zodiacs. You stick everything on, you know, waterproofs, everything in case you get splashed with seawater or it rains or whatever. But some fantastic geology there, these massive natural sea arches. And you can see here that, you know, looking through this arch, there's some quite substantial trees here on this particular island. And then yet another species of penguin, very similar, the same genus as the snares, but this is a much more widespread thing. You'll see this all the way around the Antarctic, and you've probably seen films with one of Attenborough's films of Antarctica, where these poor things are being pounded around in the salt spray and waves and climbing hundreds of meters up precipitous cliffs. These ones have it quite easy. They just sort of land and disappear into this vegetation. It's quite serene for them compared to what they have to put up with elsewhere. So after that, we've got another couple of days at sea going south towards Macquarie Island. Masses more seabirds. These things in the top left are called prions. They're a type of petrel and horribly difficult to separate from one another. That's a wandering albatross and a light-mantled sooty albatross. And this picture just shows you the sheer numbers of birds around us. Luckily for me, there were lots of very, very good photographers on the island, on the ship, and the way to sort these birds out, you're standing on a moving ship, desperately trying to hold your binoculars still. Very difficult to work out what they are, but now with good digital cameras, people were taking pictures of everything and then working out what they were looking at in detail in the evening over a cup of coffee. Not many whales. We did see some orcas as well, but this was really the only large cetacean that we saw the whole time, which is disappointing, but given the amount of whaling gone on there in the past, I suppose it's not surprising. This is just another quick clip. That's what everybody wants to see, is the tail of the whale. And eventually we get to Macquarie Island. So we're now in Australia briefly. Great place. It's a long, thin string of an island, as I say, pushed up. This is part of the Earth's crust that's been pushed up between two plates. That there is the station, you can see there, where I'm circling now. And they're getting very worried about sea level rises, and they're rebuilding it up on the top of this hill now. And so landing in Zodiacs, they invite us in for a warm-up and some freshly baked scones and show us the meteorological balloons and so on, and then guide us around the island. As you land, it's not difficult to see the wildlife. You're tripping over it most of the time. So these are, it's like so many animals, isn't it? They're really cute when they're young. These are young elephant seals, you know, big doughy-eyed things, and then they grow up into this. And these are just massive elephant seals. They're 8,000 pounds, 3,500 kilos, the biggest pinniped in the world. But it's also worth bearing in mind that, you know, they're so easy to walk up to, that they were so easy to club to death and boil down for their oil when they were being slaughtered. There's about 600,000 left right the way around Antarctica now. And this again is a short video clip of a couple of young bulls that are testing each other out. So you wouldn't want to get in the way of one of those. You trip over and get squashed, you'd know it. This was a bonus. We weren't expecting to see this species. It's usually much further south in true Antarctica, but one was sitting on the beach while we were there. So that was a bonus penguin, chinstrap penguin, very obviously named. And then these things breeding. These are Gentoo penguins, which are again quite sort of widespread right the way around Antarctica, but always lovely to see. And this gives you a bit of an idea of the shape of Macquarie. There's this big sort of ridge that just runs for about 30 kilometres, about 5 kilometres wide, and some big beaches there. We landed on one of these beaches to go and look for other better birds. But again, some wonderful flora for those interested in botany, these cushion plants and typical sort of salt tolerant, wind tolerant, you know, very sort of glaucous, hairy leaves. But again, they're very careful not to allow us to trample the vegetation. This is a big sort of swathe of tussock grass that they built this very elaborate boardwalk up to go to view a royal penguin colony. And the penguins themselves have to sort of climb up and down here, you know, every day of the week. But we get this lovely boardwalk to use. And when you get to the top, this is the view of a few royal penguins. Again, similar, same genus as the rock hoppers and snares, ones with these lovely flared yellow tufts on their heads. But you can see how they can survive in such cold conditions, can't you? I mean, this thing's so rotund. I mean, it's just a great ball of fat and blubber, so that it can spend days and days and days in those icy cold seas. Then apparently not endangered, but it's the only place in the world where they breed. So this, like the Snares Island, this is the only island where royal penguins are. There's about 3 million pairs now, but at one point there on this island there were 150,000 penguins, including kings, killed for their oil annually between 1870 and 1919. So, you know, the slaughter was massive. And this was after they got rid of all the seals and sea lions, which were much more valuable. Again, a bit of a clip.
Front row about it. Smell a little bit like sheep. Yeah.
So, best part of a tidy few there. Of course, they're quite easy to count now because you just sort of take a drone picture and count the dots below you, and they're all very neatly spaced. They're all on nests here. They build little pebbly nests and equally spaced from their neighbours, and so you know they can do some fairly accurate censuses of these things. But these are the classic. I mean, king penguins too are, you know, they're quite regular right the way round. I've seen them in the Falklands and South Georgia and places like this, but they're always so special to see. They're so spectacular that you never get tired of looking at king penguins. There's about 200,000 pairs here. This thing down here that looks like it's got a fur coat on, of course, is one of the young birds. They take over it more than a year to mature because they're so slow growing. But you know, the photographs, you know, you'll notice that most of the clips that I'm taking, you've got this background noise of wind blowing. Well, here the other background noise was camera shutters going. You know, they're so photogenic. And again, a little. So it's a fabulous noise. I mean, it's such an evocative, you know, bugling call, and you see this great big fat youngster begging for food there, but they have to because they get abandoned for weeks and weeks at a time between feeding, and they have to sort of spend a winter like that, molting out of their fluffy coat into adulthood. So it's a tough life, but so that was Macquarie Island. And then we're off at sea again for another day and a half towards the Campbell Islands. Plenty more seabirds to see along the way. One or two views of orca down here in the bottom left. What else have we got here? There's a Wilson storm petrel there. Yet another prion that all the keen bird watchers argued about. Was it this one or was it that one? And there's a royal albatross. And this thing here is the first of the Campbell Island albatross. There's a great tendency now for birds. I mean, when I first started bird watching, you know, 40, 50 years ago, there were about 8,000 species. Now there's over 10 and a half. And it's not because they discovered 2.5 that they didn't know were there. They just split, a lot of the time, they just split them. So this was originally just a black-browed albatross breeding on one island, and it happened to have a white eye. But now they've done DNA on it and decided it's a full species. So nice distinctive bird with this white eye and the black brow. So it's a Campbell Island albatross. And here we are, Campbell Island, more of this fabulous rich mega herb vegetation. I took a picture of this thing at the bottom. There was the New Zealand Royal Navy were there doing some repairs to the research station, and the bloke obviously writing on the hazards thing was having jokes. He's, with regard to sea lions, he's written there, not to be taken home, don't make good pets. Despite, yeah, well, you could see how easy it would be to pick up one of those elephant, well, not easy to pick them up, but they ideal looking, lovely looking things, but they've got big teeth, and you don't want to mess with them. So these are New Zealand fur seals in the top left, and Hooker's sea lions, the bigger picture there. Bit misleading calling them seals because they are more related to sea lions. They've got external ears and they can move about on land by using their rear flippers. Hooker's is the rarest of all the world's sea lions, with very limited range, almost exclusively in New Zealand. The numbers are recovering now after industrial scale slaughter for fur and oil right up into the early 1900s. These islands were sort of kept a secret once they were discovered. Nobody who was there literally making a killing and financially making a killing would tell any of the other mariners where they were going, because they just wanted it all for themselves. Expeditionary ships from New Zealand and Britain were followed by colonisation in the late 1800s, and they did attempt farming until 1930, and then they abandoned it in 1930 and left behind, amongst other things, 4,000 sheep and a whole load of cattle. So there's now a massive pest eradication program. Fairly easy to get rid of sheep and cows, but when it comes to rats and all the rest of it, it's a major job. I think that they dropped about 120 tons of poison bait on the island. And of course, they do it when the breeding seabirds are away. Not that they would particularly ingest it, but trying to make it as safe as possible. But here you are. This is the other big island, and here's I said there. This is tongue in cheek, distinctly different from their Auckland Island cousins. There's another snipe and another teal and another shag, and they're just like cookie cutters. They're very much the same, but deemed to be separate island endemics. There's only about 50 to 100 of the teal left in the world, and the snipe was only discovered on a rat-free offshore island in 1997. They didn't even know it was there until very, very recently, within the last 25 years. But now that they've done this massive eradication program of rats and so on, they've moved under their own steam over to the main island, and they're slowly building up numbers. So we did another long hike up into the hills. So you can see very, very misty, but some fabulous albatrosses to look at. This is my favourite bird in the world, light-mantled sooty albatross. They're just gorgeous things. They look like they've got velvet rather than fur. Fantastic things. And then these are royal albatrosses. There's a couple of other studies of the royal albatrosses. They're very, very big birds. And while we were there, again, another bonus, these things like that chinstrap penguin I showed you, they're normally a lot further south into Antarctica proper, but there was a leopard seal that had come north and was lounging about on the beach. So we got in the Zodiacs and had a look at him. Quite a formidable predator. You can see these lovely teeth that they've got there, but in actual fact, they take penguins and things like that, but a lot of the time they're just eating krill. But good to see it so close. That says it all, this sort of scruffy little ship with a scruffy little porthole, and look out every day through the mist and the rain to see how choppy the seas are going to be. But we were on our way again, at sea to the Antipodes. But again, tons and tons of seabirds to see as you're going along, so no boredom. And it gives you something to concentrate on when the sea's rough. You're looking to the horizon and looking at seabirds. It takes your mind off feeling seasick. There's a Chatham Island black-browed albatross again. Cape petrels are very, very common throughout Antarctica, and they're always following the ship. That's another royal albatross. And this is a mottled petrel, one of the Pterodroma petrels. And it's just a very short clip. This is finally getting to the Antipodes. But as you can see there, the seas weren't too bad. But what's quite bizarre is that there were people in London suggesting that you could go and colonise this and run a sheep farm on it. You know, I don't know how you'd even get onto the island. You know, it's quite tiny too. I mean, it wasn't. They were just bonkers, but they were just so desperate to stick the British flag on them that they just wanted people down there. So no landing on these islands. So there's the ship in the distance on the horizon, and us in our Zodiacs going for some quite long Zodiac rides just to see the birds as close as we can from the Zodiacs. There were 80 on the Antipodes. I was reading up there were 80 men from the USA and the UK somehow set up ashore here between 1805 and 1807. They killed 80,000 fur seals, which they sold to the Chinese for £1 a pelt, which was an absolute fortune. £80,000 in those days was an absolute fortune. I don't know how they got them to China, but they did. But they even with that riches, they left after this because, you know, the financial returns and the hardship were just too much, and probably they killed off virtually all the fur seals anyway. So pretty grim. But you can imagine, you know, early 1800s working down here, it would have just been absolutely grim, utterly grim. Another one of the very special penguins here. A lot of these are quite look-alike. This looks quite similar to the rockhoppers and the snares and the royals that we've been seeing. But this is, again, one of these penguins that only occurs on the Antipodes and the erect-crested penguin. It holds about 60% of the world's population. What's more bizarre down here is you're going along the edge of these islands, and where there's any sort of soil coming down to the coast, there's a few bushes, and you get parakeets. Now, I think most of us associate parrots with quite warm tropical climates, and this is, you know, as bleak as you could be here. They really is, and these two parrots are endemic to these islands. There's two species on this tiny little island. And they survive on picking seeds and fruits, and apparently they also take flies and rotting flesh from any dead fur seals that they find along the beach. So, you know, they eke a living out, and there they are, very nice looking birds, but it just seems such an odd place to see them. So we had a long period without getting ashore. We had several days getting to the Antipodes, and then more days onto the Bounty Islands. Again, no landing allowed. You just can't go there. And I should say, when you do go ashore, all the places we were allowed ashore, there was a rigorous system of cleaning all your equipment. All your boots had to be disinfected. Your coats, hats, gloves, everything was vacuumed, checked for seeds, anything like that. You know, almost down to your underwear before they'd allow you ashore. So the Bounties seem to be the barest and bleakest of the lot. There's only one species of vascular plant there, a scurvy grass, which was quite useful for the sailors. It's got the largest world colony of Salvin's albatross here, plus, of course, another endemic shag. But this gives you a brief idea of the sheer numbers of seabirds offshore. I mean, these islands are totally uninhabited. Nobody ever lands there, and they're just completely given over to the birds. So huge numbers of birds offshore the whole time to look at, if you can hold your binoculars steady. Onshore, there were birds to be seen. There's our equivalent of our bonksy, you know, great skua, which is the Antarctic or brown skua. Yet another prion. I think this one was Fulmar, called Fulmar prion. It's got a heavier bill. Salvin's albatross, just clipping the waves there, and Antarctic terns nesting. And then we start heading north out of the true subantarctic islands, going north now towards the Chatham Islands. And this place, understandably called Pyramid Rock, where the entire world population of the Chatham albatross breeds. And that is a Chatham albatross coming into land. They reckon there's about 5,300 pairs of this bird in the world, and they're all on this one offshore rock. And as you approach, there's it's a big island complex, and there's lots of these very, very jagged, tiny islands, which have a much better, there's much more going for them because they weren't colonized so much, and there's less influence of introduced rats and cats and things like that. There are two special birds there. There's the Chatham Islands petrel and the Tycho or magenta petrel, both of them down to sort of 50, 100, 150 birds in the world. They were almost on their last legs being eaten up by cats because they're nesting in burrows on land. And we did manage to see one of these magenta petrels. It's called magenta because it was the ship, the HMS Magenta, that first noticed it, not because it's got any magenta on it. So we're now up in the Chatham Islands, the last island group that we visited, and these were colonized early by about 1500. The Maori didn't get to New Zealand until the 11, 12, 1300, so they weren't that much earlier than Europeans, but the Chatham Islands even later. So the Chatham Islands are quite a large group, 2 times, 3 times the size of Isla, warmer, lot more bird life, totally uninhabited by human beings until the 1500s when the Moriori got there. And apparently there's a very sad story. They were very welcoming, peaceful people. But when the Europeans went to colonize the islands, they took a load of Maori with them from mainland New Zealand, who basically slaughtered the lot of them. They just started fighting with them, slaughtered them, enslaved them, and there's very, very few Moriori left. So this is very, very different now to what we've been seeing beforehand. These are the only islands that have a population. There's about 600 people, resident population, 600-700. It's all fishing and farming. Even though they're 500 miles from the mainland New Zealand, they still manage to be quite wealthy. You'd think that the transport costs would prohibit anything developing out there, but they all look pretty well off. So it's much better land, much better soil, and it all seemed quite tropical after being in the subantarctic islands. That's how difficult it is to get to see a decent view of an albatross. Take food out of your hands. These are just as we were going into land there. These are Buller's albatrosses, and very, very sad. I mean, this would have all been thick, stunted forest in the 1500s when the Moriori first got there, and certainly most of it was probably still intact before the Europeans got it. But you can see great trails of dust. It's all gone it's all gone to cattle and sheep branching. Tiny, tiny bits of land left, and this is where most of the extinctions occurred. There were 11 species of endemic bird here that are now gone. Little bits of it left, preserved behind fences, tree ferns and so on. And this is where they're doing immensely labour-intensive projects to try and keep the petrels going and save some of the few native birds that are still there. A few endemics. This is a thing called a Chatham Island Gerygone, and that's a Chatham Island pigeon. This thing is a shore plover. There are, again, only about, what was the latest count? Tiny, tiny numbers. It's the thing at the bottom left here is a weka. This is a native endemic New Zealand bird. And for some strange reason, after all of these native rails were exterminated. They brought this thing over, and it's quite a feisty bird, and they're trying now to get rid of them because they spread like wildfire. They're eating the birds' eggs and chicks and have become a real pest, so they're hunting them and trying to get rid of them. I've got in my notes here yet another boring oyster catcher. There are about a dozen species or so of oyster catchers around the world, and almost all of them are black and white and look almost the same as the one you can see outside of my house here in Brookladdy. But it's endemic, and it's a tick, so keen bird watchers want to go and see it. But where this picture was taken from, not the bird, the view, just behind me, there was this very inviting gift shop flogging cold beers. And we thought, well, we've got to go and see this bird, and it was right up the far end of the beach. So we commandeered a minibus, went zooming up the beach, didn't even bother to get out of the car, quite honestly. Quickly saw it, thought, yeah, another oyster catcher, tick, and back to the cold beer. But there are some more interesting birds there. Offshore islands, Mangere, you can see how precipitous and difficult they are. White-fronted terns. The only interesting looking cormorant shag of the lot, this is Pitt Island, which isn't black and white, and it's got this funny green bare skin there. The bird in the middle is the Chatham Islands black robin. I mean, talk about being saved by the skin of its teeth. This bird must be absolutely take the biscuit. It's an astonishing story. It was brought back from extinction in the late 1900s. There was one point where there were only 5 of these left in the world and only 1 fertile breeding female. So 5 birds left. And they've now managed to captive breed them, release them onto these islands, offshore islands that don't have rats. And there's now about 250 of them, but absolutely scooped up from the brink of extinction. One of the Zodiacs actually saw one of these. We all had radio contact with one another, and you're not allowed to land, but someone managed to see one in a bush down by the beach as they were looking from their Zodiacs. We went zooming along, and it had gone. So that's one that got away, I'm afraid, but I don't think I should be going back just to look for that. So that was the very last of the Zodiac landings. Now we pull the Zodiacs up and start heading 3 days back to New Zealand towards the end of the trip, but still plenty to do. Lots of very good lectures up here, sort of very good staff on board giving lectures about the history, the geology, the wildlife and weather and all sorts of things. And then there's this thing that some of you may not be familiar with called chumming. This ghastly looking picture here is a bucket of dead rotting fish, and you chuck it over the back and it attracts seabirds in so that you can see them more closely, get pictures and so on and so forth. Can be a bit dodgy. This is my friend Alistair, who looking like he's having great fun, having just had a huge wave come through that hole there and got him soaking right out to his thighs, but it's all part of the fun. And you can see here that, with this chumming, there's albatrosses coming in, taking away fish heads and masses of birds to keep us going. And the final fling of some marvellous seabirds. There's a sooty shearwater in the top left here, Buller's shearwater, bottom left. This all dark bird in the bottom right is called a white-chinned petrel. Goodness knows why. It's got this tiny, some of them do, some of them don't. It's got about 3 feathers underneath its bill that are white, and so some taxonomists call it white-chinned petrel. But there we are. And then there's a grey-backed storm petrel up here and black-bellied storm petrel there. So a lovely variety. Here's some more. This is white-faced storm petrel, white-headed petrel, yet another prion, and this is soft-plumaged petrel. Lovely name, soft-plumaged petrel. The thing in the middle is the last penguin of the trip that we saw. This is little penguin, little tiny thing that you can see in Australia and New Zealand. And of course, the last albatrosses, the last looks at these fabulous light-mantled sooties, young wandering albatrosses. That's a young black-browed albatross and a royal albatross, huge things. And the very final albatross in a sunset. That says it all, really. This was the quote from the World Heritage nomination: days when these islands are enveloped in unsurpassed bleakness, and days of bright blue clarity when they are the most invigorating wild places on earth. So, so that was it. But it was a great trip, phenomenal, unique, to one of the most remote areas on the planet. 9 species of penguin, 9 or 12 species of albatross, depending on what taxonomy you believe, 10 or 11 species of shags, 25 petrels and shearwaters, 4 storm petrels, about 60 species of seabirds in all, most of them endemic to the Sub-Antarctic Islands. We only saw about 120 species of birds in just under 3 weeks, but it was sort of quality rather than quantity. And so I think I calculated, we travelled about 3,000 odd miles by sea. And I would encourage anyone to do it, but you might need to win the lottery and take your seasick pills with you. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Pete. That was really interesting. It keeps touching when you go to New Zealand on the problems of introduced animals. So it's quite, your last talk was quite depressing on that matter, and you think, oh, it's so bleak, but they've turned it all, they're working on it and turning it all around. But that's, yeah, that was really good. I have to thank all these people for their lovely pictures.
Yes, indeed.
And you wax lyrical about when you get talking about birds. It's great. But I'd like to thank you really for that talk. Dave, I don't know if you want to throw it open to questions from anyone else.
Yes, that was brilliant, Peter. Thanks a lot. I echo Fiona's sort of synopsis that the colonial history and is awful. The sort of colonization of these things with the animal. I mean, it wasn't so bad just being there and slaughtering the stuff. It was introducing all this stuff. Yeah. And but at least it's quite uplifting, I think, that you've shown us that these islands, are now being maintained and brought back to where they were, and that's great. And it's good. That's uplifting to see that that's all possible.
Yes, I mean it's if New Zealand didn't have offshore islands, then it would be a real mess, because those offshore islands are the few places where you can. Where sometimes there aren't any introduced animals, or they can at least get rid of them and revitalise the natural wildlife. But if there were no offshore islands, there would be many, many more extinct birds in New Zealand, I'm sure.
So if anyone else has got any questions and want to just chat about something, ask Peter a question about fantastic wildlife, go ahead, just unmute yourself and just ask a question, yeah? You've got something to say.
Hi Dave, it's Beryl. Pete, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right. Did you encounter any modern pollution?
Yes, I mean it's not too bad down there because you're miles and miles away from any regular shipping route. So we didn't see another ship the whole time that we were down there in 3 weeks, other than a New Zealand Navy vessel. That was it. No fishing boats. I mean, all of those seas now are quite well protected from fishing. I'm sure there must be stuff washing up, but it's nowhere near as bad as in other parts of the world. But I'm sure that there would be scientists down there doing studies on these seabirds, still saying that they're ingesting plastics and left, right, and centre. So, but I didn't like to think of that. I just enjoyed watching them. It's too depressing otherwise.
How do the New Zealand government then sort of protect the fishing, their fishery protection vessels? How do they stop these big super trawlers coming and just creeping up?
Yes, I think they throw quite a bit of money at it, the New Zealanders. I mean, these islands themselves, just to maintain them and do what they've done, you're talking millions upon millions of pounds of expense, and it's an ongoing thing. So yes, I mean you can obviously declare the waters around your islands, what is it, 200-mile limit or something, and they've got World Heritage status and probably all sorts of other special oceanic status in terms of protected fisheries and so on. So I think there's probably quite a good presence there. And of course, with nowadays with radar and satellites and all the rest of it, you can sit somewhere and just watch and see what's traveling and who's going where without actually being there. So.
Yes, because the seabird numbers must be dependent on there being a supply of food for them, so there must be enough fish for them to eat.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure you don't like to delve too deeply because you start getting the sort of the miserable tales. But at least this part of Antarctica or Sub-Antarctic is looking pretty good. I mean, I was at a seminar on a Zoom meeting the other day with BirdLife International talking about seabirds at sea and their attempts at stopping this ghastly sort of bycatch. I mean, albatrosses getting caught on squid long lines in their tens of thousands. They're seriously impinging on world populations, and it's just all unnecessary. They've worked out ways of doing it to stop them getting caught, but trying to police that. But they were saying too that they can now tell where boats are, where fishing vessels are, and what they're doing just by satellite. So and then check them afterwards. But yeah, it can be pretty depressing. But you just like to hope that these waters are still fairly safely looked after. So I see two people that were with me in Antarctica on this trip. Do you want to go to the New Zealand subs? Go on, treat yourselves.
Well, we did consider coming with you on that boat trip.
Yeah.
I think we missed a lot, but we're still saving up to go back to Antarctica.
Yeah, it's pretty spectacular down there. I think it would be nice to. There was many years ago, the Norwegians, when they were whaling down in South Georgia and so on, brought a load of king penguins back with them and tried to sort of release them on the Norwegian fjord. I think it'd be quite nice to have a little colony of king penguins on Islay myself. I could just see them waddling up and down Mackerel Bay. That'd be brilliant.
Sure, that wasn't Monty Python.
Yes.
You can see the Bruichladdich distillation already, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
They had a yellow submarine.
It looked a fascinating trip, but too many days at sea for me without landing.
Yes, I must admit I was quite surprised. I knew that there were a couple of days between some of the islands, and it wasn't until I paid up, rather foolishly, not that it would have stopped me. When I read the itinerary, it said that you can't land in these places. So although you were getting to the islands, you were still confined to the ship or Zodiac. So you didn't set foot on land for sometimes 6 days at a time. But it was, I say, we were just very lucky with the weather. It could be really ghastly, sick-making seas, and that wasn't a particularly large boat, the ship. So I'm just so grateful that we had decent weather and weren't ill at all.
We had a look at the ocean-wide trip that goes from Ushuaia to Dunedin, and that's about 30 days at sea.
Oh yes, that's going right the way through that area of Sub-Antarctic that's got nothing in it at all.
Here's another island you can't land at.
Yeah.
So we've shelved that one.
Yeah.
Peter, there's a question from David Jardine saying, were the northern penguins not called great auks?
Well, yes. Very true.
Just in jest.
Oh yes. I mean, very, very similar, really. Quite, convergent evolution at its finest. An auk that gets too big to fly and just starts looking like a penguin. But it was just unfortunate for the great auk that it happened to be in the northern hemisphere rather than the southern. It might have got away with it for a bit longer. But yeah. Well, maybe we should do emperor king penguins in Iceland again then, or St Kilda. But, yeah. So.
Great talk, Peter. Thank you.
Pleasure. A pleasure.
Yes, there's some good on the chat line, there's some good comments. People thanking very much Peter for a great chat and great talk, and enjoyable talk with fantastic pictures and things. So
yeah, so it's very nice now that people are prepared to share their photos, because I've been sort of leading wildlife tours for years now, crikey, since the 70s, and I'm very aware that if you're trying to lead a tour and show people the birds and wildlife and organise things, that taking your own photographs can get in the way. So it's really nice now that with digital photography that you can say to folks at the end of the trip, you know, shall we all share our photographs? Meaning, can you give me your photographs in my case, because I'm not taking any myself. And everyone's taken a slightly different perspective on the thing. So you pull them all, and I send them out to the group on a memory stick. And but in fact, on these cruises, they do a fantastic job of all the staff on the vessel are all brilliant photographers with, you know, high class, you know, with Canon lenses and what have you, and they're all taking pictures deliberately, and they present you. In fact, I've got it right here. There's a little memory stick with all of the pictures that they've taken, and they're taking pictures of people and so on. So, you know, it's a lovely memento to have, and you don't have to bother yourself. But, so it's all very nice.
I'll tell you, as a non-birder, what is a prion?
It's a seabird. It's in the same family as petrels and shearwaters. You know, the tube noses. It's got the external nasal openings for excreting salt and smelling food and so on and so forth. But they're just a sort of a mid-sized petrel that, and all of the species live in the Antarctic, Sub-Antarctic, and they're just very, very, very similar, and you know, masses and masses of discussion with the really keen guys about, you know, did the eye stripe go slightly behind the eye, or was it just in front of it? And you're there sort of you saw all those video clips, you know, there was this gale blowing in the background, and trying to hold your binocular steady and see all this stuff was just impossible. So I was really delighted that they were taking pictures, and in the evening we'd have everyone would get together in the bar and talk about what we'd seen, and get the actual official verdict of which species these things were, because the digital, you know, captures it, freezes it, and you can zoom in, zoom out, and look at features and work out what it was that you were looking at. Otherwise it would be very, very difficult. But yeah, so that's what a prion is. It's just a very tricky little petrel, a little bit smaller.
I just never heard of them. That's all. That's presumably you never see them up in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, I don't know how they got that name, prion, but that's what they are. There's some homework for me. Go and find out why they're called prion. But, yeah, so just like a shearwater, a little bit smaller. Right, I'm reading the messages. All right. Yeah, very nice. So there we are.
Okay. Well, and if there's no more questions and then no more chat, we'll say thank you very much to Peter for giving up his time and his enthusiasm to us. It's been a wonderful talk. I've really enjoyed it.
Just a shame that we can't all get together now over a cup of tea and some ginger cake, isn't it?
Well, yes, we'll just have a virtual cake, and
yeah.
And all say thank you very much to Peter for his efforts there. Thank you very much.
Peter.
Okie dokie.
Could be a whiskey toast.
Should be, yes, yes, indeed. Yeah.
I've only got a glass of empty wine, but yeah.
I've got water. Good. Okay then.
Okay.
See you all again. When's the next talk, Fiona? Do we know?
No, I've been putting, you know, asks out to various folk, but hopefully by next month we'll have something, and we might even be able to combine it with an AGM type thing and get all that business out the way.
Very good.
We'll hopefully have a few peatland talks and things as well coming up. Oh, yes. So, yeah.
Okay. I shall say
okay.
Cheerio.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Pete.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Dave, how many folk booked through Eventbrite, do you know?
When I looked at it, it was about half a dozen, I think. but I'll check. I can check.
Aye, that's fine. It's quite interesting to know where folk have channeled through.
Yeah, well, it's a way of doing it. It's arguably, if you're going to put an event out into Facebook and into Twitter and the Twitter sphere, it's that to people you don't know, it's best to use Eventbrite, because at least they have to register with it. You know, you've got a sort of record of. You could just put it out and put the Zoom invite out to everybody, but it's not recommended.
Yeah. Oh well.
It was lovely talk. It was good, wasn't it?
No, it was good. It was good. So I've got Fiona has been talking to Laurie Campbell. We're hoping to try and get him to do a talk at some point on peatland. So he'll have some good pictures. So yeah. Right. Thanks for setting all that up, Dave. Once again.
Right.
We'll
hopefully get to Isla soon.
Yes.
Don't know. So when do you?
All right.
Yeah. Well, just let me know when if you get a date for another talk, and we can set it up and get it advertised and get it out there. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Dave. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody else.
Right.
Yes.
You enjoy that, Mum? You have to unmute yourself. You can't hear you. We can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself.
I didn't realise I was muted.
That's it. Yeah. You enjoy that?
Yes. I managed to understand, hear most of it, but there's quite a bit I did miss. But there we are.
Nice pictures, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for letting me know.
I don't think I fancy spending what must have been quite a lot of money to spend most of it time on a tossing boat. I think that was
Yeah. Okay, love.
Okay. See you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.